Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AHP Leader podcast. Now, I am delighted tonight to be joined by a group of amazing students, allied health professional students, who I'm so grateful who took the time to talk to me tonight. Now, I'm not going to direct the narrative too much here, but I've been trying to pull this discussion together for some time. And one of the reasons why it's been a bit difficult is because I'm asking students to talk about their lived experiences. And with that comes sometimes some trauma, some uncomfortable, upsetting experiences, but we're also going to talk about really positive experiences as well. The aim of this podcast is to talk about how we can make sure our practice placements are inclusive and enjoyable for all of our students, because the students are the next generation. We've all been students once. And unfortunately, some of our students, particularly from ethnically diverse backgrounds, those from LGBTQI plus community, and those with disabilities, do not have the same placement experiences as white, cisgendered, heteronormative students who have no additional learning needs or disabilities. So that is a fact. That's not up for discussion. That's what our students tell us. And it's really important we believe that, we acknowledge that, and most importantly, we learn how we can move on. Now, the students here today have come here because I've asked them and I've requested it. And anything they disclose is not going to be meant in a way that is inflammatory or is accusatory against an organisation or their university. It's their lived experience and it's the truth. And I'm so grateful that people are sharing their experiences today. And I'm going to ask each of the students to just tell us a little bit about themselves, and be mindful that each of the students may be from more than one of the diversity networks as well, and what they choose to share is entirely up to them. And first of all, Mira's on the right of my screen, and this whole idea came with a conversation between Mira and myself. So Mira, over to you, a little bit about yourself, and thanks so much.
Hiya, I'm Mira. I'm a third year physiotherapy student at Brunel, so I'm almost there. I use she, her pronouns. This is an area I've been really interested in since a tricky placement experience, basically. I found it particularly difficult due to my ethnic background, and being able to speak about that on placement was something I didn't feel empowered to do at that moment in time. I then went back and spoke to the uni. I had some variable experiences, and I felt like I was almost having to seek out staff from my own background. I couldn't really discuss it with a wider team, I felt, and so I felt it was kind of stuck in an echo chamber, and maybe I was asking people who it's not necessarily their job to speak to me, but I knew they would share that lived experience. So yeah, it's something I'm really interested in, and I'm a member of the BAME action group at Brunel, and one of my second placement was a curriculum review at Brunel aimed at improving diversity in the physio curriculum.
Thank you so much. Fee.
Hi, I'm Fee. I'm a speech and language therapist in my third year of fourth year programme, and I'm dyslexic, and I've just found the whole degree progress really difficult with not having people understand my needs and having to fight really hard to get myself advocated and listened to. I mean, I've had about 50% good experience and 50% horrible, really traumatic experiences. So it's just nice to find a group that can hear those experiences without people thinking that I'm losing the plot. So.
Thank you, Fee. Niklaus.
Hi, I'm Niklaus. I'm a Chinese Singaporean, currently doing my second year in Teesside Uni for physiotherapy. Really excited to hear everyone's ideas and perspectives on challenging the current system and how we could have more accountability and progress our society in a better light. I've had a couple of not so pleasant experiences due to my ethnicity, and I hope to share them all with you as we go along.
Thank you. Tosin.
Hi, I'm Tosin. I'm a student dietitian in my final year of university. I use she, her pronouns. I belong to multiple different university networks or groups. I've had quite a few issues of my placement, I think mainly due to the disabilities I have. Obviously that's compounded by being in different ethnicity to administrators on placement as well. And I'm just interested to really talk about that site and hear what everyone else has to say.
Thank you so much. Martin.
Hello there. Sorry, I was away with the fairies for a second there. So, my name is Martin. I am a final year physiotherapy student at the University of Brighton. I handed in my dissertation last week, so I'm actually done. Exciting. And I start my new job next week, which is even more scary, but quite exciting as well. So I use he, him pronouns. I identify as gay. I am a member of the CSPs, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy Student Reference Group. I am the Equality and Diversity Officer on that group. So I hear students' experiences on placement from being from the diverse backgrounds, and we work with the diversity networks and we work with the CSP itself to try and change the impact within physiotherapy and how we can change it for the future. I'll be talking about only my own experiences. I won't be sharing experiences from any other student that's come to me. I will say that it's only going to be my own personal experiences, but I will say that I've heard problematic experiences from LGBTQIA, disability network, and from the BAMES section as well. So it's definitely something that needs discussing, and I'm really pleased to be part of this evening.
Thank you. Charlotte.
Hiya, I'm Charlotte. I am a third year student speech and language therapist like Fee. I've been doing my course part-time, so I'm actually in my 6th year. I live with multiple chronic illnesses and disabilities, most of which are classed as invisible illnesses, and my symptoms kind of fluctuate a lot. I have reduced what we call usable hours compared to people who are non-disabled. And really excitingly, since last year, we've set up our Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists have set up a disability working group. So kind of similar to what we're doing today, sharing our experiences, and that has been so good to kind of hear other people. Obviously, it's not good that other people have had similar experiences, but it's a really lovely kind of community to have people saying, I've experienced this, this has also helped, and that kind of thing. So it's amazing to be here today, and I can't wait to hear from everyone.
Thank you. Sherrille.
Hi everybody, so my name is Sherrille Iqbal, and I studied speech and language therapy at Leeds Beckett University. And I got involved here because I think it's really important that we talk about the experiences that we had, and I kind of figured there were experiences that I were having that other people were having across the allied health professional network that we weren't really talking about. So I think it's really important that we talk about these, normalise talking about the problems that occur and understanding the roots of that, and then working towards challenging those behaviours and thoughts, so that we can create a more inclusive environment for people like me and other people that are identified in liberation networks. So I'm really, really looking forward to speaking to colleagues. It's been really wonderful to be a part of some of the change that's happening, as Charlotte's mentioned, in the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapies, so working towards a diverse profession. It's very, very exciting to see that work. On supporting our Black, Asian and minoritised ethnicity peers, which is a term that I use. I know other colleagues use things like BME, people of colour, etc. And I've largely been involved in work in the higher education sector, so namely at Leeds Beckett, but across other organisations in higher education, such as like Advanced HE and QAA, which has been really, really great to see the change happening at our universities, which is only just beginning. So it's wonderful to be part of the allied health professional journey. Really, really excited. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, that was a bit of a motivational speech there as well. Wow, thank you.
Thanks.
Sherrille.
Hi, I don't know if I can top Sherry's speech there, but my name is Sherrille Tosin. I study occupational therapy at London South Bank. I'm currently in my final year on a 2-year course, and I identify by the pronouns of she and her, and I'm Black, as you can see, but my background is West African Ghanaian. I'm actually part of the AHP Plus Anti-Racism Practice Learning Group at the university, which focuses on decolonizing the curriculum. And also I'm part of the affinity group called Race G, which signifies Race and Cultural Equity Group. And I see myself as an activist at heart, to be honest. And I just despise injustice. So I really just, I fight strongly for racial and social injustice. And I'm just really happy to be here. I mean, I've had quite a bad experience on placement at one point, and it's just really good to be here with people that have like-minded experiences so we can discuss it and see a way forward.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry about some of your experiences as well. Almu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Almu. My pronouns are she and her, and I come from Spain. I am currently studying occupational therapy at London South Bank University, and I am on my 4th year because I'm doing it part-time. I am part, like Sherrille, I am also part of the AHP Plus Practice Learning Group, and additionally, I am part of the second affinity group that we have at the university that is called Allyship and Cultural and Equity Group. And I decided to join these initiatives because of my experiences working in the NHS, but also fundamentally because of the experiences that some of my peers have had in placement, in particularly experience of racism. And I thought that as well as supporting them individually, it would be a good idea to be part of something that will influence change on a bigger scale. So I am already glad that I am joining the conversation today because I'm really amazed by the amount of knowledge that there is in this room today, and I am looking forward to learning from every one of you. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Rick.
Hi, hello, I'm Rick. My pronouns are he, him. I just finished up my 1st year at the University of Manchester studying speech and language therapy. I'm coming into this from someone who has a perspective of being bisexual and being someone who identifies as British Asian. I'm currently a committee member for the recently founded UK SLT Pride Network, which is a really exciting thing that hasn't existed yet before. So we're very excited to be able to represent for that. I also volunteer with Opening Doors London and ELOP, which are LGBT organisations based in London. And coming into speech and language therapy, I was often told that the profession is very white, straight and cis, and that really puts a lot of us at a disadvantage. That's something I really want to challenge.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a deep dive in, and I am guessing the people that are listening to this podcast right now are those that want to learn, want to educate themselves, want to believe, want to be better. But there might also be people listening that think this just doesn't happen, that our students don't experience racism, discrimination, homophobia, transphobia, but they do. They tell us they do. And sometimes when they raise concerns, they're not listened to. So I just want to give everyone who wants to share the opportunity to just tell us a little bit about some of their experiences, and kind of how it's made them feel and the impact it can have on a student who's went to study a healthcare degree because they genuinely want to help people. So Mira, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Okay, yeah. So one of my beginning placements, it was a very, very large team, and I was one of only 2 people of any sort of minority background. And there was a culture of very normalized, I don't even want to use the word microaggressions because it was just racism. Microaggression almost diminishes it, but it wasn't directed at me, it was directed towards patients. And, you know, people could say things in a group environment, it would just go unchallenged, and I felt so uncomfortable. There was another student on placement with me, and just from the first day, they were so much warmer with her than they were with me, and I couldn't work out what it was that I'd done. And it got towards the end and starting to reflect on all of those little bits and bobs I'd heard that I had identified as actually being a little bit racist. And it wasn't directed overtly at me. I think people often know better than to come out with very racist things. But yeah, it started to feel like, actually, no, my face doesn't fit here. Maybe that's why I'm slightly on the edge of this. And it was really uncomfortable to go back to university and say specific stuff that had been said about patients that was a little bit more concrete, but there was something directed towards me that was almost kind of intangible. And it's hard to put that across when it's not so obvious, because I felt my experience, at least reporting it, people became quite defensive or dismissive, and I think everyone just wants to see the best in their peers and their colleagues, and so they kind of wanted to explain it away, but it made me feel very isolated and like I wasn't being heard. So it really, I felt it put me in a very difficult position, and I actually had to go and seek out multiple people at the university before I actually got support. So yeah, it was tough, and the options pretty much when you're having a difficult experience on a placement is you can report it, potentially then repeat the placement. And so it feels almost like you then get punished for having had that difficult experience. I wish there'd been something more concrete for me there that I could have sought support there and then. But yeah, it was an earlier experience. I've got the benefit of hindsight now. Certainly if something like that were to happen, I think I've now carved out a kind of a supportive network within the uni, but I really felt like I had to really fight for that and really make the effort to go and find that myself. And it took a long time. It certainly wasn't there ready-made.
It's almost like it's not anticipatory. There's no anticipatory, or you may experience racism as a student of colour, you may experience homophobia as a gay student. There's no anticipatory, that's what I'm hearing. Thank you, Mira. Fee, coming down to you, please.
Similar to Mira's, I had a similar experience on my early journeys to training as a speech and language therapist with Educator, who, yeah, she just, I don't know, just took a disliking, and this was also a peer placement. So my peer was coming up to me and saying comments like, she's being really harsh with you, she's being really difficult with you, I don't know why that is. And I could never figure out, I mean, still can't give concrete reasoning for this, but she would make comments like saying that I would be struck off for spelling errors, that it was completely unprofessional to do these notes with spelling errors. And when you're in a timed condition or under pressure, you're increasing that demand capacity, so therefore you're under more stress to then do something, which then means you're going to make more errors. And I speak a lot about that now, but she was just very critical without being constructive. And then she would come and sit down with me at lunch and then fire lots of questions at me. And so dyslexia is not just about spellings, it's also about recalling and memory and that, all those more complicated things. And despite me like advocating, saying like, can you please not like bombard me with questions like I need time to think. It wasn't really taken on board. And yeah, she was very critical without being constructive, and also she would do stuff like I wasn't allowed to have the same resources as my peer, and I never knew why, but I mean she passed me in the end, but she was very hyper perfectionist with her marking, so it seemed like my report from that one was not as reflective as the last three, so very similar experience.
Lucy, I'm sorry about that, and Faye, I'm telling you, I can't speak proper and I can't spell and I've done all right, pet, so honestly, thank you for sharing that. Martin, I'm coming down to you next.
Thank you. It's actually really weird to say, I think, Mira, me and your story sound almost identical with how I had an incident on placement. So I had an incident where I would say microaggression. It wasn't microaggression, it was homophobia towards a patient it wasn't my educator, but someone else that I was shadowing at the time was speaking to this lady. She was doing the normal sort of subjective assessments that we do, and then she mentioned her partner, and then the physiotherapist assumed that the partner was male, and then she was like, "No, I'm married to a woman." Absolutely carried on perfectly in front of the patient as if it wasn't an issue, which it shouldn't ever be an issue. And then as walking away, there was sort of the tuts, and then lesbian. That should never have happened. The problem is, when you're someone that's LGBT yourself and you're hearing that come out, and I hadn't actually told anybody at this point. I don't think I need to broadcast my sexuality, but I would never hide it either. I'm very confident with who I am. But once I heard that, I was like, well, this is a workplace where clearly that's acceptable. There was the first time in probably, I can't remember how long, where I did not come out the entire placement and I just hid it to myself. And it's something that we should never have to internalize our sexuality ever. It should not something that we need to hide away or feel embarrassed about. And it was really difficult to do that on my part, and I think it caused anxiety for me on placement, which should never ever have happened. And it was completely, I didn't need to be doing that, but I felt if I was to do so and that was the reaction, that I could get the marks down. And I don't want to be marked down for who I am. I want the best marks possible. We all do. We're students. We work to strive for the best marks we can possibly get. But if I have to hide parts of myself, it was a big debate, and it took me quite a lot of reflection to do so. And I decided not to do it. And it made the whole placement really difficult, because then I had the conversations later on over lunches where it's like relationships, and you've got a girlfriend. It's like, well, no, I've actually got a boyfriend, but I really don't want to be telling you guys. Like, so I'm just like, oh no, I'm single, conversation finished. Like it should never have happened that way. And looking back, maybe I shouldn't have done so. I think I would have changed my opinions and looking back in hindsight. But at the time, I wanted to do what I felt was the most comfortable and probably the best way that I could get the best marks for myself. And then there's the little microaggressions do crop up where they start talking about mincing and being camp every so often, and it's like, I know there's that sort of there's a fine line between the workplace banter, which can be fun, but then something like that which can actually be quite hurtful, and it's something that maybe people don't really think that actually this can really affect some people, and it does cause a lot more anxiousness. And I think for me, the only way I really got properly through that, I was someone else I was talking to in the LGBTQIA network in the CSP that I was able to talk to and sort of talk my problems and thoughts through with him, and which was really useful. And then I was able to debrief later with my university lecturer, who's also LGBT, and we would be able to talk it through. And it was really, really good and really useful. But it's sort of, I shouldn't need to feel isolated or not be able to be empowered to be who I am. I should just be able to be, this is me, and I'm about to do physiotherapy. I'm not about to be judged on who I am as a person. And that was really difficult. And I would love to see some of these things change, definitely.
So I think one of the points I've just picked up on there, Martin, is about being included and belonging, because you just automatically, that split second, you were like, I'm not, if I was heteronormative, I would belong here, and I'm not heteronormative, so I don't belong. And you just automatically, as a student, just distance yourself from that, because you're like, is this a battle I need to have as well as doing a degree? And thank you. Almu, I'm coming to you next.
So my experiences don't come particularly from placement, because I have to say I have been very fortunate with my placements, unlike some of my peers who I'm not going to talk about their experiences because that belongs to them. But the only thing I can say is that they have gone through an enormous traumatic situation that has impacted not only their mental health, but also their physical health. But so my experience are more around working in the NHS, and they are directly linked with my accent. So just to say some things, one thing that I get it from professionals, but also from service users. So service users sometimes might tend to start saying repeatedly, what at every single thing I say, just to let me know. And we go back to those microaggressions. It's just to let me know you don't belong here. That's one of the experiences. Or telling me things related to Brexit, or saying things like, why are you here? Or things like that. And then around the professional environment, one thing I get a lot is to be told, oh, your accent is so sexy, or being compared with Sofia Vergara, which, you know, I don't have anything against her, but I'm working in a professional environment. So the moment someone tells me that, I'm losing respect from the rest of the people. I'm not going, or at least that's, you know, my impression and my perception. I'm not going to be considered in a professional way. And my ideas might not be considered because they're only focusing on how sexy my accent is, apart from the fact that, you know, letting alone racial discrimination, in my opinion, this is a way to objectivize a woman in this case. So yeah, these are some of the things that I experience. And the other main thing is, again, going back, is something really subtle, but I am used to going to a room, and the first time I speak, it's almost like people go really quiet, and they only start to consider what I say once someone else in the room has validated an idea. Almost like there is a link between intelligence and your accent, if you know what I mean. But I am used to that, and I know that that's something that is going to very likely happen because there is not a lot of accents in the AHP community anyway, or at least I don't find a lot of accents in this community. Yeah, so yeah, those are my experiences.
Thank you. A lot of what you've said there I've heard before, but I've actually never heard of someone sexualizing a person, a student. I mean, I find that absolutely horrific. And if anyone's listening has ever done that, that is just wrong on so many levels. So I'm so sorry for your experience.
Sorry, Rachel, let me just clarify. It hasn't happened in placement. It has happened in my professional. I don't want to,
yes.
because yeah,
it's not something that happened when you're on placement. Yeah, I mean, that is just, so I'm sorry for your experience. It's and now you're saying it, I can imagine someone saying that, like Martin said, in a passing comment, is banter, is meaning it in a nice way, but is the person receiving it, that's not what you want to hear, like you're saying about your professional self. So thank you. Tosin, can I come down to you next, please? And then anyone else that wants to jump in.
Okay. So my experience in placement is that I think they maybe try to accommodate you in terms of disabilities, but they're not necessarily thinking about the right thing or what you actually need is actually going to help you. And so that results in you kind of being left to figure it out. But then I was also having to tolerate kind of comments and maybe kind of looks and stares. And then when I raised the issue of I didn't necessarily like how I was being treated, the things that, you know, either being mainly questions being directed to you that I felt were inappropriate, and lots of comments or things that they had thought of that weren't necessary. It then became almost like I was being blamed because I think maybe that upset them, or maybe they were mortified. And instead of them going away and thinking about that and maybe trying to rectify it and do right, it then became a case of almost like closing ranks, and it was very difficult from then on. That was really very early on in the placement of the first week. So I think it's kind of difficult with placements in that even if you have asked maybe reasonable adjustments beforehand, there's things you don't really know until you start, and then you're kind of left to have to figure it out by yourself. And that wouldn't necessarily, that's not the case if you're working. You need to have work, you have occupational health, maybe even some HR involvement. And then I think that's also compounded just with the stress of placement. That it's so stressful because if you fail, there's different stages of what you can pass and what you can't pass, and do extra weeks. But ultimately, if you fail placement, you failed your course, you won't get to redo it. And so you've done all this work academically to get onto placement, and then you're having to put up with this or deal with these other things that you don't really have necessarily much help or support with, and you're just on your own. So that just makes it just even harder, because you're trying to become that profession as well. You don't know what you're doing. So then when you have that, and then you're trying to have these relationships with the supervisors that maybe isn't there, they're not really connecting with you, it just makes it even harder. That's really what I can say in terms of my experience of not being so positive. And it was difficult to reach out to the university because I felt like they were more invested in that relationship with the trust and maintaining that relationship with the trust, and not necessarily wanting to intervene at all, kind of believing what the trust was saying without talking to me, and then again trying to also blame you for the situation that's happened. And I think it can just all have been avoided if things are really thought out from the outset, and if people just have that awareness that they need, and things that maybe you're involved a bit more. Yeah, it's very difficult when you are kind of in that system and you're trying to adapt systems so that you can use them, and maybe the reason adjustments you've asked for aren't even being implemented, and then you're having to feel that kind of hostile environment as well. So I think that's my experience kind of.
Oh goodness, there is so much we're going to come back to on that, but first of all, I don't know you, but I can tell already that you are an absolute diamond, and we should be making things as good as possible for you on It actually breaks my heart to just hear that, because it's about equity and it's about humanity, and it's the fact that these challenges exist for you, for anyone, is just absolutely shameful. So thank you so much for sharing that, and we're definitely going to come back to some of those points. And Charlotte, if I can come to you next, because I know you might have had some similar type of experiences maybe, and I also just want to make a point that Charlotte has limited screen time, so she does need to dip out, that's why. And Charlotte, just talk to us about some of your experiences.
Yeah, thanks Rachel. Yeah, I can definitely you've probably seen me nodding along to things. I think that, and I've been jotting some things down as well, because so many things kind of just resonate about feeling uncomfortable, and that it's already a stressful situation to be on placement, and being part of that is being judged about what you're doing, and so when you're kind of the added stresses make that so much more difficult, and also about not feeling like you can say things because that person is going to give you feedback and a grade and a mark, and so you don't really want to do anything to jeopardize that, because like, you know, like we were saying, that's the whole point, that we're there to do the best that we can to get a good grade. So it makes it really difficult. And I've always found the kind of reasonable adjustment process really long and difficult and stressful. And kind of, so I think I said I've been at uni for 6 years now, and it's taken this long to get something sorted. And most people don't have that time, 3 years and they're done. And so I think there's just so much room for things to change. And how kind of, when I started, I didn't know anyone else who had a disability that was a student or a speech and language therapist. And now, like, there's a few of us on this call, and I know a few, you know, a good portion of speech and language therapists and students who have a disability or a chronic illness, long-term health condition. And to be able to see yourself in the profession, people who are like you, who are doing it, who are managing kind of, you know, against it all, is a huge deal. And I think kind of similar to that is that when we're talking about reasonable adjustments for placement, you feel like you're starting completely from scratch, and it feels like there aren't any suggestions about what they've done to support other people. And it always feels to me like they don't suggest anything in case you choose it when you don't need it. And I don't know whether that's just my perception, but that's what it feels like. And that even having some suggestions about, oh, this is what we've done previously for students, would that be helpful, makes such a difference to kind of say, how can we support you? And I think I've heard that once in the whole time I've been at uni. And so that is just kind of, it's just awful. And I've kind of noted down things about the language that are used in forms being really isolating and making you feel so different. And it's just all the little things that add up that makes such a difference. And the other thing that I've kind of talked about a lot in our Royal College Disability Working Group is that discussions about reasonable adjustments are often kind of interwoven during the placement day. And so you're 1 minute you're talking about a client, the next minute you're talking about something specific about your reasonable adjustments, and that feels really inappropriate. And I think sometimes it can feel like your kind of access needs are being weighed against your clinical skills, and that's, to me, so uncomfortable. It makes me feel really uncomfortable. And in one of my practice educator assessment forms, there were comments throughout the whole thing about reasonable adjustments and things, and that made me feel really uncomfortable. I didn't say anything because I didn't feel like I could, and she gave me a good grade, so I just kind of took it and went. And that kind of thing is like a like society's kind of views about disability, and that just kind of, it just has such a big impact. And luckily I was with a peer on that placement. We were in a small group, and so luckily I had another peer who we kind of would be able to talk to each other about what had happened, because you kind of feel like, am I just overreacting to this? Am I being too sensitive? And it was so good to be able to check in with each other and be like, no, that was not okay. But we noticed that we were definitely treated differently towards the kind of able-bodied students that were there, non-disabled students. I thought that was really difficult as well. So yeah, it's a battle, but it's so good to, you know, it's awful to hear about people having similar and other experiences, but it's so good to hear that you're not alone with it, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. But you know, we're allied health professionals, we're therapists, and these are therapy students. So thank you so much for sharing, Charlotte, and I'm sorry again.
Thank
Hilma
you.
coming to next. Sherrille.
Hi. Let me try and take my hand down actually. I had a really horrible experience on a placement. I'll try and put it all into a nutshell, not to go too in depth about it, but I was having communications with my educator before actually meeting her. This was via email, and it was lovely. Like, I know we didn't meet each other, but we seem to have got on quite well with how we're communicating and trying to prepare my placement in advance. And So I was looking forward to actually meeting her in person. So when I met her in person, she actually said to me, "You're not my student." And I said, "I am your student. We just emailed each other." And she's like, no, I don't think you're the right student. And I even offered to show ID. She refused. She frantically got on the phone to the placement team, still implying that I'm not the right student. So for me, I took that as, well, I didn't want to take it as something that was racist at the beginning, but overall, when I look back, I feel like it was because my name doesn't, I don't know, maybe my name doesn't sound ethnic enough, I don't know. But I feel like she didn't actually assume that I was of ethnicity at all. So she told me to get out and go and sit in the canteen and wait for her to actually confirm with the placement team if I truly am the student that she's supposed to have. So now, this canteen, I was sat there for about an hour and a half the most. And it's not like it's a place where it's close to where I live, as I probably would have just left, but it's like at least 40 to 45 minutes journey. So I just continued to wait. Then she called me in. I said, "Oh, just come in then. I can't get through to them." I believe it was a bank holiday actually. So I think she couldn't get through to them. She's like, "Just come in. You know, I can't get through to them, so you might as well just stay." Obviously, that's my first impression of this educator, and it's not a good one. But anyway, I still swallowed that pill and just decided to continue, just have a smile and try and get to know her and just kind of take that as a little blip. And throughout the placement, she just was really cold, really mean. If I say good morning to her, she'll just literally like walk out of the office and slam the door. Mind you, it was a mental health placement as well, on an acute mental health ward. And this was new to me because I've never been in a ward like that. And I was a little bit terrified at the beginning because it's quite a secured unit. And she would leave the office door open. Next minute I know, the patient is literally sitting on my lap, like they got in through the door that quick. And I was just scared because I don't know how aggressive or, you know, how their temperament is. And I remember I brought this up to her and she told me that, you know what, you're going to have to just get used to it. What did you want me to do? I can't force the door to close. And I was like, I recall that the rules of this office is to make sure the doors are closed. But anyway, that continued. So we had like quite a rocky relationship. And during placement, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I don't want to get emotional, but I had something tragic really happened. And I alerted the placement team and they said, you know, are you sure you can continue with the placement? And just to get my mind off everything, I was like, no, I want to just continue. So I literally was told that I shouldn't come in, but I wanted to go in and just finish off. I was halfway through anyway. So I was going through this thing that was going on with me and it wasn't easy because I had to kind of leave it at the door and then come into placement and be all smiles. And this educator did not make it easy at all. On one occasion, a patient slapped her hand and she said that it was because of me. That's why she slapped her, because I was there. If I wasn't there, that wouldn't have happened. And I don't know what she really meant by that, but it was offensive. And then on a second occasion, the patients really got on well with me and we were liaising with one of them and trying to get more information to fill out an assessment. And as I was speaking to the patient, she put her hand in my face. And from where I'm from, that is so disrespectful. Not even just my culture, but in general, it's very rude to do that. But I took more of an offense because in my culture, it's just completely wrong, especially the kind of hand that she used, her left hand, is disrespectful. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna leave it here. I can't deal with it anymore. So I decided to, the thing is, I knew that a lot of my other colleagues on placement who are of ethnicity went through the same kind of thing with their educators and the uni just withdrew them from placement. So I didn't feel comfortable to go to the university and tell them what was going on. So I decided to speak with my educator supervisor because I got on well with everybody, to be honest. And I actually really thoroughly enjoyed that placement despite this situation. I got on really well with everyone, and I spoke with the supervisor, and I just explained to her that I'm really getting a bit worried now because my placement is near enough ending, and my relationship with my educator is just terrible. I'm not sure she's going to just take something out of the hat and just say, look, I'm failing you, when she didn't show that kind of, decision with my actual tutor when she came in for our midway assessment. So we had a private meeting with me and her and a supervisor, and the supervisor let her, say, does it look like Sherrille is going to fail? And she said, no, there's no reason for her to fail. And she's like, okay, we just want to make sure because she's near the end and it looks like things are a bit rocky with you two. And she said, no, there's no reason for me to fail. So on the last day, as she did say, she didn't fail me, but on the last day of our supervision, she decided to interrogate me. And she said, I'm really sorry that you don't have the confidence to be here, that you felt like I was offensive to you, that you couldn't even speak to me. And I actually did try and speak to her in our other supervisions, and she got very defensive. And she just continued to annihilate my character. And to cut a long story short, I decided to let the placement team know in our university about what had happened. And they were just like, well, you should have reported it earlier. And I said, I didn't feel comfortable. And then they said, well, what do you want to do now? And I said, after that supervision that I had with her, I feel really violated. I just don't feel like she should get away with treating people like this. So I want to make a formal complaint. And they said, if you do that, you're on your own because we're not going to support you. You've passed. I didn't see what the big deal is. And that hurt because obviously I was going through quite a tough time and the uni were aware of it, but I just felt like I was being scrutinized. So I decided to go through with the formal complaint, but they were more concerned about their connection with distrust and keeping that placement as a connection. And that was what hurt, because for me, I always say that the university should take us as children. Like as a parent, if you're a parent, you have a child, you would take them to a babysitter who is competent enough and confident enough to do their job, has the right qualifications. And I feel like that's how the university should treat us when they, allocate us to different educators. They need to be competent enough. We can't be going through such trauma and having to just take it under the chin because we passed. So that was just a really painful experience. And I know of other people that have actually left the course altogether because they couldn't handle it, or the university just decided to not help them in that situation. So racial incidents are not really taken seriously. But yeah, that's my experience.
So first of all, thank you for sharing that. That's absolutely horrific. But the saddest thing about that story is that I've heard that so many times. And unfortunately, you're not alone. So the first thing is, I believe you, and I believe that happened completely. And we're going to come back to the point about the relationship between the university and the provider, the placement provider, whether that be an NHS hospital, whether that be third sector, a secure unit, because you're absolutely right. This is where the system's broken, and it's not our job to fix that, but it's our job to use this platform to say, these are what our students are experiencing. And that story was so important because it's the story of many. And we need to validate people who maybe haven't had the opportunity to say that, or they've shared it and they've been told to just forget about it, or it's their perception, or they've got it the wrong way around, or that doesn't happen here. That doesn't happen in this institution. And I think you mentioned about names. The most common time I hear that story is when people have what would be known as traditional British names. I mean, I don't even know what a traditional British name is anymore, but that's what people say. So when they turn up on the first day, it's like, oh, it's the reaction of Mary walking in and not being a white female. So thank you. Wow. I feel so emotional already. Rick.
I'm really sorry, Sherrille. That sounds awful. I'm sorry I had to go through that. But yeah. So I think like Martin said, kind of coming into placement, I always kind of there's always this fear and nervousness of like how my identity is going to play into it. I can't really like stop myself presenting as someone who's not white, as someone who's a person of color. So that's something that's going to be there straight away. That's not something I can control. But sexuality, how I present my sexuality, my identity is something I can control really, and that's something that I did kind of hide coming into my placement until I felt comfortable with it. I don't know if I would have kind of said anything about it, said about my partner or whatever, if I didn't, if there wasn't actually another practitioner who was out, who was a gay man and was quite comfortable with the team, and if it didn't have a team that was that treated me like an equal, treated me like part of the team, not like just someone additional in the corner that didn't really care about having on the team. I think that representation is really important. Just seeing someone who reflects your experience, is in a position of power in a sense, and is able to kind of give that support. So I was quite lucky because I feel like my placement educators did a lot of things right. There's a lot of things that I'm really glad for. But I think there's always going to be that fear coming into my next placement because my ethnicity isn't something I can control, but my sexuality is something I can hide. And I don't want to be hiding either of them really, especially since I come into placement with the name Rick, which isn't it presents as very white as well. So again, that fear on top. The thing I kind of resonate or kind of stuck with me more was when I was going through my interviews for speech and language, and my interview for a couple of different places, and my interests were in multilingualism and gendered voice communication for trans and non-binary people. That's something I'm really interested in, those two fields. And I talked about that quite a lot in most of my interviews. And one or two universities basically were like, we just don't do that. We don't have any interest in pursuing that really. And we're not in diverse areas. We don't have people like that in our areas. In the areas where we kind of where we practice. I thought, isn't that something you want to pursue with your work? Isn't that something you want to kind of make sure that you have opportunity for students to know about and you want to develop your teaching in? But I guess I just kind of took that and went away from those universities and moved to the gayest place I could find really. I just moved to Manchester and thought, this is where I feel like I can be comfortable as a person of color, as someone who identifies as bisexual, and also a university that's leading work in increasing diversity in our profession. Because as I said, speech and language therapy is seen to many, like our own practitioners and people outside the profession, is very white, very straight and very cisgender. And there wasn't a lot of work to change that, I don't think, until more recently. And I'm really glad for the work that has been put into the profession from people like Charlotte and from people within the profession to really help our students feel more supported.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for sharing. And we're definitely going to pick up on a couple of points you've brought up there as well. Thank you. Now, who's next? Niklaus, and then we're coming to Sherrille.
Right. Thanks, Rick, for sharing. So basically, in my own personal experience, well, back home, we have this thing called Singlish, where we like colloquially shorten sentences to make them more direct and affirmative. So my supervisor that I was with at the time perceived this as rude or sort of barbaric in a sense, which kind of harshly marked me down for certain criteria in terms of assessment. There were other comments as well pertaining in the form, pertaining to my race, which came in the form of like, oh, you speak pretty good English for a ... and there were many other encounters and incidents like that, which make me kind of think that, oh, would she had said that if I was a white person, for example. And just to touch on a bit on what Mira was talking about, like, I think there are not many avenues that we could explore. after hearing those comments and words, what do I do, right? Like, who could I go to? Do I risk sabotaging my placement and repeating the whole thing? Do I send an email to my module leader in the university and risk being seen as a complainer? Or do I just take it on the chin and just move on? And I think most of the time, most people would take the latter option and just be quiet. Maybe that's why 66% of university students don't report any racism that they faced. I think moving forward, the changes has been made in terms of student assessment on placements to deal with such situations, but it's more on kind of a student level. For example, I could reference the CPAR forms that they have made, I believe this at the start of this year, which includes a category on inclusivity and diversity, but it doesn't really look at certain sectors where the students can kind of rate that of the institution or the organization or the educator, which I think would greatly hold them accountable and could be the next step in improving the current system that we're currently facing. I believe that some educators are not properly trained or may not be the best fit in terms of managing students, and this has been exposed by investigative studies that have sort of seen that clinical educators are not really reliable in assessing and marking students. And this comes from the point of view of both the students and the clinical educators themselves. So maybe just a last takeaway point would be if such a system was to be made where we could rate clinical educators, and based on previous records of them being marked pretty lowly, would it be a genuine good idea for them to be taking on future students, or would there have to be like a sort of standard of procedure where if an educator is constantly showing maybe covert or implicit bias towards certain students or receiving complaints, would they be still in the roster of handling such responsibilities? So I would just like to end off with that. Thank you.
They are such powerful points, and one of the uncomfortable truths I learned about myself was that I did have that implicit bias, the students who were like me. And I am sharing this uncomfortable, horrible truth because it was almost like it was modeled within me that I was to create the next students that were like me and that look like me and behave like me. And it's so wrong, but the system is broken. And until we recognize that in ourselves and say, actually, this is wrong, we need diversity, we want diversity in our professions, then until we acknowledge that, then things will never change. So everything you just said there strikes a massive chord with me, as well as you've already come up with some of the solutions and some of the impact points of how we can change this. So thank you so much. Now, Sherry, over to you.
Thank you. I think I should really start by saying, like, I'm so sorry you've all had those experiences. I think when we have them, we feel really alone, and you really feel like it's your fault. And really listening to that really resonated with me because I felt exactly the same way. And it's a little bit ridiculous that what's connecting us is our trauma and the experiences that we've had that are not pretty. They're not the experiences of, oh, did you learn this medical science module that I did, or did you learn about this thing that the HCPC is doing? Those are things that definitely connect us, but it's our trauma and our the lack of competence in terms of being anti-racist and anti-ableist, and uniting against homophobia and or any forms of xenophobia in our practice. And that's what should unite us, the fact that we are against all of these things that make us a liberation group. So thank you, because that's really, really touched me. And just like yourselves, there are so many experiences on placement that I've had that have made me feel like I just don't belong, like the colour of my skin is a problem, that my name, I've been given a westernized name of Sherry, it's not even my real name, and even that's a problem. And countless other experiences throughout my whole time on my degree. I think I only ever actually felt comfortable on 2 placements. Throughout my whole degree, I felt comfortable enough on 2 placements, which should just be the norm. That should have just been the norm. I should have felt comfortable, and I know that now. I should have felt comfortable and accepted and like part of the team on every single encounter that I had with somebody in the speech and language therapy world. And that the biggest takeaway for me was that I didn't come to university to educate you on how to make a more accessible and inclusive environment. I came to university and have been placed on your service to learn how to be a speech and language therapist, not to educate you on why you should be more accessible and supportive towards needs that I have as a person, just as a person, not about being a South Asian Muslim woman, like just as a person. So whether it was the fact that somebody had said that I should get my priorities right and I should pick between my faith and the prayer times that I have as a Muslim, or my degree and being a speech and language therapist, because apparently creating an equitable environment and being diverse and celebrating that isn't a standard of proficiency to be a clinician. Of course it's not. That's sarcasm. It is, and it should absolutely be the norm. Or the fact that, like Sherrille bravely said, being on placement when you turn up and the educator is like, well, you're not the person I was expecting. Or when somebody says to me, you speak so eloquently, Sherry. What are these things supposed to mean? And they're titled microaggressions, and they're meant to be these microaggressions are these really small things that I said, but actually they're not small, they're huge to my life. And I think, do I need to code switch then? Should I completely change my accent and try and speak like the Queen so that they'll accept me? Do I need to wear a lighter foundation so that they'll think that I've got lighter skin? Should I just completely remove any part of my identity so that when I turn up to placement, I am this student that they expect and that they want, rather than this student that needs to take that 10 minutes to go and pray and have that conversation with God that keeps me grounded and reminds me of why I'm a speech therapist. And there are countless other things that I could go into. But it's really, really important that any educator, any professional that is listening to this, really hopefully reminds themselves of the proficiencies and the competencies that they need to adhere to being a practitioner, and actually the things that we need, whether it's the fact that you have a reasonable adjustment, which shouldn't be called a reasonable adjustment, it should just be an adjustment. For example, why can we only make reasonable adjustments? We should make an adjustment for a person, because the norm isn't the norm for everybody. It's a ridiculous Eurocentric standard, in my opinion. So please go back to your competencies, and even though they're quite vague and they typically say something like adhering to equality, diversity and inclusion, it would be great to reflect upon that and really think about what you can do to make sure that people who might not look like you or sound like you feel like they belong for those 10 weeks, whether they come in 1 day a week or whether they are there for 6 weeks every single day on your service, because it will one day be their service. And actually it could very, very easily not be our service at all if we don't feel like we belong. I'm going to leave it there because I feel like really emotional, and I'm just really grateful for everybody sharing their experiences, and apologise. And thank you for allowing me to be part of this community and this network. And I really am excited about the future of allied health professionals, because we will be stronger and we will be there to be professionals. And when your students come, which you will all be educators one day hopefully, they won't have to take time out of their clinical placement to educate you on their needs, because you'll be able to do the research for yourself to meet the needs of that person. So please, educators, go back, look at your competencies, understand what it is when we say what we mean when we say that we want an equitable experience and an equitable profession that is anti-racist, that is anti-ableist, that unites against homophobia and any form of xenophobia. It is incredibly important to our lives. Thank you, Rachel. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. No, honestly, I just wish I could jump down that screen and just give you a massive squeeze. Like that. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that. So brave, so passionate, and so important. And again, all I can do is apologise for some of your experiences, but very grateful that we have you and we have your experiences. For all the trauma that it's given you, we have to talk about this openly and honestly for meaningful action. Now, what you talked about was human values, and one of the things I want to get across to the educators out there is that often what humans need, students, juniors, even some senior staff, is the basic, like if you think about the hierarchy of needs, they need to be nurtured. Food, water, nutrition, psychological safety, that's what matters to people. The rest of their journey, they will be allowed to grow and flourish because they have that bottom bit of what they need. And so often, managers, leaders, the people that just want to do things to get the results, to tick the boxes, will go right up here. But actually what you have to do is start at the bottom. And I think someone mentioned it, which was a brilliant point, you know, how can we support you without having to say, do you have an additional learning need? Do you need a reasonable adjustment? How can I support you? What's worked well in the placements? Is there anything that I can do to make you feel more included? Or is there anything that I can do? It's like you're putting the ball in your court. So you're saying, tell me what I can do, not what I have to do for you. Tell me what I can do. Charlotte, now I'm just going to make us. We're on the hour mark now. So if anyone needs to drop out, please just disappear. But we're going to continue this conversation, okay? So Charlotte, coming down to you.
Thanks, Rachel. I guess I just wanted to kind of echo what Sherry was saying about the kind of, I hate the phrase reasonable adjustments. I think it's awful. And I've started to kind of use access needs because it feels much more neutral and everyone has kind of access needs and it's really just a human need. And also, which is a separate discussion, but I'll just mention it, about kind of special educational needs, and really they're just additional needs. And so, anyway, yeah, and Rachel, definitely, it's what I wrote for some notes about how to support students with additional challenges. My first note was be kind, and then I was thinking about actually, from my point of view anyway, that I often don't know that I'm doing a good job until like the midway review and the clinician practice educator says, oh, you're doing really well. And I thought, well, it would have been nice to know that kind of, you know, in week one. So about giving specific praise really often, because I think as students, we're always going to doubt ourselves. But when you've got kind of additional challenges going on, you doubt yourself even more, especially when I feel like a lot of the kind of emailing and kind of chatting tends to be about like the access needs and things. So you never really feel like you get to have that kind of clinical discussion just about your clinical skills. So I think that's really important. And also kind of, yeah, I always put it on my form that we send to the practice educator. Literally, if all you do is say to me, how can I support you? What can I do to support you? That's it. That's kind of that'll do, because I think it's a fine line between, they don't need to know in depth about what's going on for you health wise, just what can they do to support you. Do we need to do anything differently today? It's really difficult because it feels so simple to me that I don't know how we can get it so wrong. And like you're saying, Rachel, is that we're allied health professionals, that we work with people who have so many different challenges and needs. I don't know how we can't look after our colleagues and our students in that way. It just seemed really, it doesn't fit to me, especially speech and language therapy, and we're all the time making kind of taking into account our clients' difficulties and making the environment different to support them so that they can be their best. So yeah, I feel like we do have the tools, we just don't seem to be able to support our students in that way. And I'm just trying to think what else I wanted to say. Oh, another thing I wrote, which I kind of assumed this would happen, but I don't think that it does, is that if a student discloses a specific health condition to a practice educator, that they take some time to do some independent research, not to then have a discussion about it with the student unless the student instigates that, but just so that they understand a little bit more. And I really think that there's no excuse for not doing that, because there are so many people that share their experiences on the internet in on all the platforms. So even if you don't know the specific condition, you will be able to find some kind of information about what it's like for that person. And I always like to use the spoon theory to talk about energy and fatigue and energy limiting chronic illness. And that's a really, really easy, simple way that anyone can understand about what might be difficult for that person. And again, not so that they can have a discussion about it, because I don't think that's appropriate on a placement, but just so that you know a little bit about it. So I think I will leave it there, and I'm going to head off now and say goodbye to everyone. I need to go and lie down. But it was so lovely to speak to everyone, and I can't wait to see what we can do together. Thank you so much for sharing everyone's experiences.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Charlotte, and words of wisdom there for sure. Now, what I'm going to move on to or come round to is a little bit about good experiences, what makes inclusive placement, more positive experiences people have had. And I'm also going to talk about some of the things that don't work for students. So we have the Equality Act that should protect all views, especially with protected characteristics. But because you're not employed by the organisation you're having your practice placement with, that just doesn't work. And it relies on someone being an advocate or almost having your corner, which again, for all of the challenges we've talked about or touched on, that just doesn't happen. So this is where we're going to put the ball in the educator's court. And Mira, I'm going to come to you first. And Sherry, I know you want to come in and you need to drop off. But what does this mean for students? Like, I mean, I know that might sound like a really basic, simple question. But why is all of this important for students that will get this right?
At a basic level, when you've had difficult experiences on not one but two placements, you start to consider whether there is a space for you in this profession. And if we feel like there isn't a space for us, and I think dropout rates are much higher for students of various diverse backgrounds and disability, then how do we advocate for patients if it's such a small homogenous group that's providing treatment? If you get all people in the same room from the same background, they come to the same sort of answers. We need diversity. We need a broad range of people in this. And if students feel alienated, if they feel like this isn't their space, then that becomes much harder.
Thank you. Sherry.
Thank you. I'm so sorry I've got to leave shortly for some family commitments, but I really appreciate the time. You know, like I said, there were two placement experiences I had that were incredible, and that was down to the SLTs really taking the time to speak with me when I first started. No question, no judgment. How are you? What can we do to support you on this placement? And the thing that they said that made them behave in that way was them reminding themselves of their placement experiences. One out of those two placements was a person of colour who I could identify with. There was somebody that looked like me and sounded like me, and having role models is incredibly important, and we all know that. I could see myself working in that trust because of that person taking me under their wing. So I think it's incredibly important using positive language of what can we do to make sure this placement goes well, what would you like to learn, etc. Really listening and understanding and sort of empathizing to the needs. So when I needed to pray, allowing me that 15 minutes in the day was really, really important. But most importantly, was speaking to me like I was a human and not racially slurring me whilst they thought I wasn't listening. Funnily enough, creates an inclusive environment. It's actually really not that difficult. So somebody that listens and asks the right questions, challenges, absolutely. It's incredibly important that person challenges the knowledge that I have as a speech therapist, because that's why I'm there, but does it in a friendly way. There's a term that I've come up with, which is about having your educator as a critical friend. So that may sound a little bit unprofessional, but having them be a friendly approach is really, really important. But also being critical in asking the right questions to make sure that your knowledge and experience is developing and broadening. And actually, I think we need to bring more of that into the profession, because the two educators that I had that were almost my critical friends kept me on my course. And then the other thing, very quickly, is about buddying up with our universities. So like you briefly touched on, Rachel, actually being able to report this is incredibly difficult, and we're not really protected by anybody or supported anywhere. 66% of students don't disclose their experiences of racial harassment or racism, and I'm one of those statistics. And it's because we don't feel like there's any trust, because people speak to us and see us as an other. So we have a lot of community building work to do, but working with institutions and even people like the HCPG, our Royal Colleges, to create clear reporting structures is really important, because that builds trust. And whether you want that to go somewhere or not, we have a bank of experiences that students have had that we can then work to make sure we break down to create a more inclusive and equitable environment. So yeah, thank you for listening to me.
But that shifts the power balance. That's a problem, because that means people need to devolve their power, and students need to have the power as well, which is the right thing, because it's all about empowerment and about student of the next generation. But a lot of old school, like the traditional hierarchy, like having the power, it's just so archaic and toxic. And this is what these educators do. They want the power, and they want to be the parent, and that's the child, and their way is the only way. So you're absolutely right. And this is the whole education that comes around it. So agreed. Now everyone's going to have a chance to have a say next. I'm coming to Rick, then Almu, then Tosin. I'm giving you heads up that we're coming to you next after Rick and Almu. Rick.
Yeah. So just alongside all the kind of the things that you mentioned, kind of kind, welcoming, being open, and positive feedback and all that kind of stuff. But I think something that's really key is thinking about the educators thinking about why they're in the field that they are, like why they're doing what they are, what brought them there, and why, like, just why the student wants to do what they're doing. Just like I've had a lot of friends from my course just not enjoy their placements at all, because it seemed like the educators just didn't care about what they were doing. They weren't interested in their field, and they weren't interested in showcasing that to their students. I was quite lucky that on my placement, my educators loved what they did. They wanted to talk about it all the time with me. I was interested in talking about their research with them, and I wouldn't have thought that I wanted to go into respiratory SLT, but now it's like all I want to do, just because like they were so passionate about what they did. I think it's really important for educators to think about what brought them to their field, what made them feel passionate in the first place, and how they can bring that along to their students, and how they can create that inclusive environment at the same time. Just having that level playing field, like you mentioned, Rachel, and yeah.
Do you know, Rick, I once managed someone, and she absolutely hated having students, and she was forced to have students, and I started managing her. And I says, you know what it is? It's all right, you don't have to, because I don't want you educating students with your attitude. And the problem, I'm not going to get into the finances of it, but there is just genuine people who don't like student education, they don't like educating people. Does that make them a bad clinician? I don't know, that's for a separate podcast. But you're absolutely right, Rick. The educators have to be passionate about what they do, have to be passionate about teaching and education because they're representing the profession. So yeah, make sure that if you're a replacement provider, clinical educators are passionate, that they want to take students, that they're invested in their time, and that they have the support as well to provide a really inclusive placement. I love that. Thank you. Almu.
Actually, I will completely agree with that, with you two, because one thing is to be a clinician and another thing is to be an educator. And I think it requires different skills. And we are expecting of every one of those AHP clinicians to be able to have those skills to transfer knowledge into students. So I completely agree that perhaps that's one of the things to look at in the first place, to equip educators so they are able to transfer that knowledge, so they don't become frustrated and then they don't take it on the students. But other things, I want to really bring attention to something. Everybody's been talking about different experiences of racism or discriminations because of different reasons. But the question that comes to my mind, obviously the first one is to keep a student safe and to give them the support that they need. But also I keep asking myself, what's going to happen with the service users that are being cared by these educators? And this happens often with regards to the accent. I have had peers that have been called off during meetings by their educators because of their accent. Oh, nobody understands you. Oh, you need to speak more clear. But the truth is, we work in a very diverse population, and we need to be able to speak to everybody. And we need to be able to adapt our communication skills so we can provide care. And that might involve that we might have clients with different accents. So if you are not even able to understand the accent of your student, how are you going to be able to work with your clients with accents? How are you going to make them feel? And, I think it was Sherrille that was talking about proficiency standards. And it's very clear in there. I think it's standard number 5 that refers to cultural competence, and it's a duty by professionals to be able to adapt your practice to the different cultural needs of the population we're going to be working with. So I will say, with regards to students in placement, I think a very important thing is when a student, and often people with accents, this happen a lot, that we might express our insecurity with educators and other professionals. We might say, oh, can you understand me well? Or tell me if my accent is very strong and you can understand. So when that happens, I will say to educators, empower that person, but actually letting them know that their accent can also be a tool. And it can be something that is necessary as part of the AHP community. But also, we need to stop making assumptions and maybe show curiosity by, someone that is different in front of us. Like, I get a lot of stereotypes, such as, oh, you Spanish people know how to live, you always take siesta and party all the time. And that makes me feel really bad because, yeah, it's true. We're not so much about the siesta, I wish. But yeah, we know how to party, but we also work really hard. But I keep thinking then, how is this person thinking about me? They think that I'm lazy and I only want to party and things like that. So instead of making those assumptions, just show curiosity. And I think it's a way to actually celebrate the difference that you have in front of you by showing that interest on the other person and tell me more about your culture. And that goes for names as well. It's not the first time, what Sherrille was saying, it's not the first time that I have heard that a student has been given a Western name without asking for it. I mean, that is really, even my kids, they have been Britishized, like they have made their translate their name in British, in English, and I always complain about that. Now, a lot of people from here might not understand that, might think that, well, actually it's not, you know, it's just a small thing, it's easier for us. But those things make a difference because they disempower you and they break your identity, your personal identity. And it comes to a point where people think that they have to present themselves in a different way in order to be accepted and to belong to there. And that has a really big impact on confidence and your personal identity. So yeah, I think I've told too much.
No, that's so important. Thank you so much. Lots of absolute sound advice that I completely agree with. Tosin, coming to you next, please.
So I'm thinking of particular educators I've had on placement and what made it a positive experience working with them. I think it's mainly that they didn't reduce me to the things that made me different. They didn't make that sort of my whole being, and they were curious about me and willing to just work with me, ask questions. Maybe if I was trying to adapt systems, they would look at how to adapt it too. They weren't just kind of staring at me, trying to make those adaptations and making comments. Also, maybe also being able to break rank and not just kind of double down with maybe what someone else has said. They would also stick up for me, or if they heard that something had happened, so maybe something I'd been given an activity to do that was inaccessible, they would be appalled and maybe would report that to someone higher and say, this isn't right. Or there was one incident where I had to meet a dietitian somewhere. I couldn't find it, and it was just mainly because all the signs in the trust were just old and the place had moved. So it wasn't really clear where I was going. I ended up in a clinic for another dietitian, and the dietitian ended up finding me, but then was trying to say that it was my fault. But this other dietitian that was more senior was like, no, Tosin has been here waiting for you. And it reported that, so that it didn't get put on any kind of record that somehow it was my fault I was late. I mean, it makes me think of the Martin Luther King quote where he says, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So it's just important for those few people that are positive to really kind of be able to speak up. And it's not always good enough if someone just kind of slides next to you and says, oh yeah, that was terrible, but they're not reporting it to higher being. And it's easier for them to kind of stick their neck out because they've got less to lose than you as a student that doesn't have that power in the first place. You're there to learn and you're really kind of being judged there. Those are the main things I'm thinking of when it comes to a really positive placement experience. It is just being able to say, oh, I'm trying to figure out how to do this and how am I going to adapt it. Because unfortunately for me, with my disabilities, there is no hiding that. And sometimes it's a case of those microaggressions that may be racial, you just don't even address them because you're having that other battle of trying to just make adaptations and get the placement and trying to make that situation for yourself. Obviously, you are affected by these statements. I mean, it wasn't really fun for me to be on placement when after Harry and Meghan gave that Oprah interview and then Piers Morgan left and great morning, good morning Britain, and you're just hearing comments and you can't say anything. So I think it is just about really being able to kind of work with us, work out what we need, and really speaking up for us as well if you see anything that's not right. And maybe just trying to find ways to relate, because some of our differences, they are somewhat relatable. They're not these kind of alien things. I think ultimately it's a system that's broken. I mean, I've heard all these amazing students have been saying about, the skills and proficiencies. But I think there is sometimes a difference is that people don't necessarily see that in themselves. They see patients as them, and then there's like us and them. So there is that difference. There isn't that sense of this could be my brother, or this could be my sister. And even if they have that personal experience, there is still that kind of compensatory aspect that's the onus is always put on you to really almost have to pretend that there isn't anything that's different about you and really fit in. It's not really put on them to think about, well, what can they do to help? And it is just about someone just being a bit more open and curious. It's kind of quite straightforward. It doesn't have to be someone's gone on lots of courses or they've read lots of books. It's just about them being able to maybe access networks within the trust themselves and to say, okay, maybe we've got a student that has some of these issues that's coming on. What can we do and how can we help them? And then really talking to the student and when they're there. And something that Charlotte said earlier that's really important is that where are you going on placement? They don't need to know in explicit detail what it is that you are going in there with, what it is that's maybe different about you that you're requiring those access needs. It's more about what it is they can do to help you and really being able to speak up for you and advocate for you so that you can get the most out of placement. Because as you were saying about the Maslow hierarchies of needs, when you're coming in with those differences about you, your needs are maybe just a bit higher because you need that extra bit of protection. You need that kind of extra almost buffer so that you can get through. So you're not having to maybe hide parts of yourself or pretending that it's no big deal just to make everyone else comfortable. And really to make yourself feel comfortable and safe. It just adds to the stress and puts an extra burden on yourself. And yeah, that's really what I wanted to say about trying to make it a more positive experience for all students and also for the placement providers themselves. And if they do need help, sometimes I think they do. As you were saying, sometimes someone doesn't want to be an educator. Maybe they need that extra support, and that shouldn't be seen as somehow they're failing.
Absolutely. It's about just that personal approach, isn't it? Forgetting or a lot of the curiosity is a good thing, but when it becomes intimidating or when it encroaches on your I suppose your own identity, that's when it can become very oppressive and it'll have the negative effect. And that's what I'm hearing there. And thank you so much for sharing that, Tosin. And I'm hoping that a lot of people have listened and took that away. Now I'm gonna come over. I can see we've got a new addition here. Wow, multitasking at its best there. So I just want to come into you next, Sherrille, and just if you can maybe talk about some of the ways educators can be more inclusive or supportive, and what maybe positive experiences that you've had.
Yeah, sorry everyone. We have a little addition here. She woke up. I was trying to get her back to sleep, but it wasn't working. I think what could happen is, first of all, I think the university in the educator training, they need to incorporate things like cultural sensitivity, having this kind of education on how to deal with people from all various walks of life. Because I feel like when an educator happens to have someone who's Black, for example, and they have their own bias, it's like torture, because that student has to go through that and probably not say anything. Like my other colleagues have said, that some of them didn't feel like they could even speak up about it, which is really sad. So I think that could be prevented by having some sort of, solid training, robust training around that. Another thing is, especially in our course, OT, it's supposed to be person-centered. And I feel like that is completely not there in terms of, in terms of the placement that I had, the educator I had, that wasn't there at all. But I can say from the placement that I'm on at the moment, it's been really inclusive. Like they've been very aware of like labels, and they try their best not to label people as such. So they always ask you what you'd like to be identified as. And I'm even in the process of helping them with a questionnaire that they have, an equality and diversity questionnaire. So they're being really mindful of having tick boxes and just having you know, a free worded answer where people can just write what they identify as without any, you know, restrictions. And I think that's so good. This is the first placement I've ever seen that, where they're really making sure the students' experience is enjoyable. And if it's not, you know, for some sort of consequences to be there. But I think a good thing would be like, in terms of like the HCPC, you know, if you, for example, do something inappropriate with a client or whatever, and they're alerted by it, you can literally get struck off, if I'm correct. And I feel like in terms of, you know, if an educator is homophobic or racist, whatever it is, I think that should also be included, like a serious disciplinary should be put in place, because then people see how severe it is and how, you know, we all are supposed to be treated equally. And I think that's the only thing that will kind of put a bit of fear in people, to be able to realize that it is a serious situation. You do need to treat everybody the same. They may not come from a similar cultural background like yourself, but when you're at work, you have to be professional and make sure that everyone is welcome and supported. And I guess with students, because placement is usually, how can I put it, like free labor, students go through a lot because educators tend to put them through a heck of a lot, because they know that they're here to get assessed, and they do take advantage, unfortunately. So I think educators need to be pulled up on some of these things, and students have to have, I think someone mentioned about some sort of ambassador or someone that they can confide in about what's going on in placement, and to make sure that their grades are not going to be, you know, disrupted by the complaint or whatever it is that's happening. I think maybe even including like an educator drop-in service, where maybe educators may be facing something that is worrying to them, or they don't know how to handle a certain situation with a student. So for them to have that support, because maybe it's a lack of support for the educators on placement, I'm not sure. But I think that should really be included, as well as a student drop-in as well, just to make sure that students have that kind of support all around whilst on placement.
Yeah, it's like priority, isn't it? What priority is given to it? Education, training, and then you've mentioned it again, it's come up a couple of times, like how do we monitor the competency of the educator, and how, where's that mechanism? So that's something we definitely need to take away from this podcast. Yeah. Now, thank you so much. If you do need to drop out, please feel free. Absolutely gorgeous. Niklaus, coming to you, and then I think it's Martin, Fee, and Mira's going to wrap up for us. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think pretty much I've shared the same sentiments in regards to training and creating like a multicultural environment for students. Besides that, I think educators could create peer groups that would seek to allow students to feel more welcomed and achieve a sense of belonging. I think in terms of what educators shouldn't do would be sort of creating a form of otherization, or making decisions that aren't very well thought through. For instance, assigning patients of a certain ethnicity only to a certain physio, for example. I've had instances where I've only had to deal with where most of the Asian patients which came in were just blatantly handed to me. And I'm guessing most like the rationale of that would be like, oh, it's because I'm from that kind of culture and background, so that would be a more suited role. But that kind of diminishes the nuance of certain races and backgrounds, such as mainland Chinese people, there's Malaysian Chinese, Singaporean Chinese, Chinese from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and all of that. So it's just a very it's not really a one size fit all option where they could, you know, seem to have our intentions and seemingly want to be progressive, but also they have to take into consideration that although it may seem that way, that might not be the case most of the time. I've also seen a study where they found like traits in which students sort of and encompass that allows them to succeed in terms of physiotherapy and other health care allied courses. These three traits being one of them being social, having strong commitments, and also being resourceful. So I think if educators could empower students to take into consideration of these three traits, obviously with creating a multicultural dimension that makes them feel included, that would then not sort of discriminate them against being social, and then would sort of encourage them to step out of their shell, to come out to talk to the educators more, create meaningful bonds. The second trait, which was having strong commitment to the cause. Obviously, if a student is faced with many of those experiences and discrimination, that would sort of weaken their commitment to the cause and thus their results following that. And lastly, I would say in terms of resourcefulness, it comes mostly across as like a social economic factor, and in part where if educators could maybe, as many of the people before me has said, spend some time doing some research and offering certain ways or methods in which students who face such challenges can better deal with them, in the sense of maybe counseling or therapy, that could be one of a really good solution in terms of dealing with all of the negativity and the emotions that come through with such trauma, and that could better distill all of those thoughts and those feelings into something more productive that could be brought into the workforce and to be worked upon and to be progressed with, instead of just bottling everything up and generating hate against certain racial groups, or espousing certain things online which may drive people away from our cause. So I do believe that with most of the things that everyone has mentioned and the things that I've said myself, those would be really beneficial in terms of educators providing a very inclusive and successful experience for most of the students in the future.
Wow. I think you mentioned you're going to be some kind of president for society, and that's probably exactly why after that. So thank you so much for those words of wisdom. Martin, coming to you, then B, thanks.
Yeah, I think something just before we go on to what we're making, I think something I wanted to touch on is all parts of the Equality and Diversity Act are things that students have problems with. We've discussed tonight sort of the LGBT, the BAME, the disability, but all parts of the Equality and Diversity Act are things that students get challenged on. And as somebody that's politically affiliated, for example, I'm not going to go into politics, don't worry, but I mentioned it might be a passing comment about the party that I'm a part of, and it's immediately a judgment. It's immediately something that, again, you can be judged on placement, and there should never be any sort of judgment on any other part of your characteristics. And it's something that sometimes, even though we focus on sort of the big three, I would say, there's other little bits of microaggressions across the whole spectrum of that Equality and Diversity Act that we really need to focus on and make sure that we think about as well. Coming back to Sherrille's point about the HEIs and their student educator training, I totally agree that student educator training is the complete way forward. And I'm going to say something that I'm really proud of my university for doing. The University of Brighton have brought us in to help with student educator training now. So I did a talk as a student that's also gay, how that would sort of be impacted in placements. And it's so good because we can actually talk to the educators on this platform like this. And I think this is something that all the HEIs across the country should be doing, because we are the people experiencing these things, and we know firsthand, as you've heard tonight, about how everybody feels. And I think the best way to do this is to have students be part of your training and deliver that training to your educators, so you know how we feel, because it's best to be on that personal level. And there's so many students across the country that there's so many different experiences, but hearing from students that you could potentially have yourself, I think is the most amazing thing that you can do. And I would, if any HEI sort of leaders are watching this, please bring in us. We know exactly what we're doing. You've heard how you've got some strong-minded, amazing people here. We'd all be happy to be to be part of that, and you should be using us. We're a tool for that. Again, something else Sherrille said about ambassadors. I think ambassadors are such a good way as well. If you've got somebody that you can go and have a conversation with that may not be an educator, but maybe isn't from your university either, but another person in the trust, I think is such a good way forwards. Being able to have that space so you can just say how you're feeling with somebody that you would identify as a role model. And we've said about role models tonight as well. I mean, we want somebody that we can see ourselves becoming. And that's the key part of having that ambassador. It's not just somebody to talk to, but it's somebody that I want to be like you when I've graduated. And that's that difference with the role modeling. But to the actual question, what do we want from educators? I think it's a really simple one. We can go into big, vast whatevers, but we just want a safe space to be able to discuss things. And you've heard tonight how we're feeling uncomfortable, we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling isolated. We don't want to feel like that. We want to feel relaxed. We want to feel we can be comfortable with who we are and become the therapist that we know we can be. And I think the best way that you can help as an educator right now is have a weekly safe space meeting with us. Simple as that. And then we can tell you exactly what we're saying, and you say that this is not part of marking, you are not going to be judged, and you can just talk to me about how things are going. And it's such a key part, just saying, we're not going to be marked, we're not going to be judged for a minute. You just talk to me about how you're feeling. And I think it would just change so many of these perceptions and so many of these sort of prejudices that are starting to come out. And I think it would be really beneficial too. Yeah, I'm going to stop before I carry on.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for that. I can't add anything to that. Thank you so much, Martin. And you are right. All the education and the insight we need is here. It's in the palm of our hands. Fee, coming into you before Mira. Thank you.
Can't really top what you guys have said already. So I just think really you can't really change me. I am who I am, and it's really about listening to what I'm saying. I mean, I've just finished my end of placement where I passed, and I feel like I did really well. I got outstandings in some categories, and I feel like it was a really fair report with real balanced feedback. And I think that's really down to sort of listening, presenting the questions in different ways. Can you write it? Can you read it? And also remembering that, you know, it's about a demand and capacity module. Don't tell me to reply to all your emails. Don't ask me to write a work schedule for myself, because that's just adding more onto my demand. And then just really, I think, yeah, listening to the students, we're a tool and we want to learn from you, but you can also learn from us. And yeah, just give us time. We're coming. We're just a bit slow. But yeah, thank you so much, Rachel.
Honestly, thank you to you. Now, Mira, you are going to wrap this up for us, and maybe from your listening and from your perspective as a student, what needs to happen next? Give me a task, give everyone out there a task. What's next, and kind of what have you took away from this?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for sharing. It started off feeling quite hollow listening to everyone's really tricky experiences. It was kind of harrowing to hear some of your own experiences and some other really quite shocking things. So thank you everyone for sharing. It's really brave. I was quite nervous about this before we started, so I can really appreciate how much it's taken from everyone. I just want to add a little positive experience as well of my own. And I really want to recognise as well with educators, it can be uncomfortable for all of us in all spheres of our lives to talk about things where we have no lived experience and where we feel educated or ignorant in that regard. And people can be very nervous about saying the wrong thing. I think that's very human, and a lot of us then choose not to go there because we feel uncomfortable. And I think it's all right to be uncomfortable, but what we're saying here as a group is that we need to be made to feel safe, and the ways that you can do that are being listening without creating that oppression and without creating a burden on the students, because it's not entirely our job to educate you on these things. Actually, on previous placements where I've done really well, and and you can see it reflected in my grades as well, where I felt really comfortable in the environment I've been in, educators have actually had conversations with me about all of these sort of things. They've been really open to learn. And one thing that's been really handy and prompted those discussions is where there's been external stimuli, like there's been external kind of things. So discussing my research placement, it was a natural way of talking about these sort of topics. Or for example, in my last placement, we had training. It was a mandatory training on reporting incidents related to equality and diversity. And that was a really good prompt to open up the conversation and discuss it in a natural way. I felt it took some of the pressure off my educators. It took some of the pressure off me because it came up naturally, and it seemed like that was the priority of the trust, to discuss these sort of things. It wasn't my job to educate them or be difficult. So yeah, I think in summary that we've discussed loads of different options, pathways for reporting, so students have somewhere to turn, ambassadors. So educators, please don't take it personally if your student doesn't feel comfortable talking to you because of your background, and you may not have had that lived experience. It's nothing personal, but provide those avenues if you can, whether that's someone in your team or signposting to BAME networks or any other kind of networks you have. I know lots of people have LGBTQIA. So yeah, all of that. We've spoken about competencies for educators, educator training, being honest with yourself. Do I have the resources? Do I have the ability to take on a student? And yeah, having that open attitude, wanting to educate yourself. None of us have all of the answers. We can only present our experiences. And if you're open to listening and providing that safe space, that's all any of us can ask. No one's expected to get it right. We don't go into our placements perfect. Educators don't come in perfect either. It's a journey and a process of learning.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing the concept of this whole discussion together. Now, final words go to our youngest member and her mummy. Sherrille, over to you, please.
Thanks, Rachel. And thank you, everyone. Actually, just following up from what Mira said, she kind of touched base on what I was going to mention. Just having, and I know a few of you have mentioned the kind of groups that you are under, like LGBTQ, and for myself, I'm with BAME UK, and I find all these groups to be so helpful because you're speaking to people who are so like-minded and also have been through these challenges like yourself, or even worse, and they can always kind of just direct you, or as well having that little comfort as well, like a little family. It's useful. And then again, being on a platform like this and having such a diverse range of speakers like yourselves, it's just amazing to come across people who have so much knowledge and unfortunately have been through such a traumatic experience. But as I said before, like we're just such strong individuals, it just speaks so much volume. And I hope that a change will definitely come from this. And thank you, Rachel, as well, for setting this up, because it's just amazing. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone.
So you're not alone. You need to find your tribe, and there's people out there that genuinely want to be the change we want to see. Yeah. So on that note, just a massive thanks to everyone for sharing, and this isn't the end, and thanks to everyone for listening. Thank you very much.